Yes, sir. What's your name?
Adjust that a little bit. My name's Marcus.
Hey, Marcus.
So earlier you said that our moral standards are based off something that we don't set ourselves as something that is above us. So how would you explain that societies outside of the United States, and even some within the United States, have a moral standard that's okay with some things that are what we see as less than or way below what we set a standard to drop down to?
Yeah, excellent question, Marcus. Let's just use the Nazi culture against the Allied culture back in World War II. The Nazis thought it was fine to kill Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, these kinds of people, because they wanted to create the super race. We look at that and go, well, that's wrong. And so in order for us to convict the Nazis at the Nuremberg trial, we said to them, you shouldn't have done that. And they said, we were following the orders of our government. And we came back and said, you had a moral obligation to disobey an immoral law. Why? Because there's a moral law, international law, what Thomas Jefferson called in the Declaration of Independence nature's law, what the Apostle Paul calls the law written on the heart in Romans chapter 2. That law is God's nature. And the only way to adjudicate between these two laws, say the Allied culture and the Nazi culture, was to say that the Allied culture was closer to this law than the Nazi culture. So when we say that there's got to be a standard beyond, we're not implying that everybody's necessarily going to agree with that standard, or we're not implying that everybody's going to behave according to that standard. But what we are saying is we can identify when a culture goes wrong because they deviate from the standard of God's nature. So the moral law or the moral argument doesn't depend on everybody being moral. It doesn't even depend on everybody agreeing what is moral. All the moral law is saying is if there's one thing morally right out there and one thing morally wrong, there has to be a God. So if it's wrong, say, to torture babies for fun, God exists. If it's right to love babies, God exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you.
Good question. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Katie.
Hey,
Hi.
Katie. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm great.
I just had a question about the moral issue where you said that there's things that we inherently know that we already know is right and wrong, which I had kind of two questions about it. First was that you had said previously that God and the Bible, that's what gives us morality, and without that, it's just an opinion. So if we already have these inherent traits, then how can it just be an opinion? We can still, sorry.
Oh, no, I see. I think I see where you're going, Katie. Let me reframe it. What I don't mean is I don't mean that if I just have a moral sentiment that it's just my opinion if my moral sentiment corresponds to God's nature. That's not an opinion. I'm saying if there is no such thing as goodness known as God's nature, then every thought I have about morality is just an opinion because there is no objective morality for me to appeal to see if my opinion lines up with His nature. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And the second thing, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I should have processed this more before I stood up.
Take your time. It's okay.
Basically, sorry. You said that there's an inherent set of morals and people without God wouldn't have morals, and that is not subjective, but yet throughout history and different cultures, each set of cultures has their different sense of morality. Like, there are cannibals who believe that that's perfectly fine, and there are people who believe in that's, well, I don't believe in cannibalism, so there are people that believe cannibalism is wrong, so.
Good question. Let's take the cannibal situation for a second. Because the guy I mentioned earlier, Jay Budziszewski, I was talking about to Moses, he talks about that in his book. It turns out that people who are cannibals just define people in the other tribe as not human. And then they go through these rituals to try and expunge themselves of the guilt of engaging in cannibalism. They know it's wrong, and what they do is they redefine the other people as not human, so then suddenly it becomes right for them. It's the same thing that happened with the Nazis. Hitler could not get his SS to kill Jews without dehumanizing the Jews. He called them subhuman creatures in order to get the Jew, or to get his SS to actually kill them, because it's such a strong sentiment that you ought not kill innocent human beings. So what do you need to do in order to get people to kill innocent human beings is you just define them as non-human.
Yes, I understand that dehumanization is
Right.
what makes the murder, but okay, aside from murder, any other moral issues like LGBT rights, that actually spans through many different churches, how they have different opinions as the time goes on, and as we go on as a society, things in the Bible change. Not in the Bible, our views on how we interpret
Yes.
the Bible change.
That's the difference between what we call sociology and morality. Morality, let me reverse that. Morality is true, right, and wrong. What we think about true, right, and wrong and how we practice morally is what's called sociology. And so we might change our moral practices, but that doesn't necessarily mean that right and wrong changes. If right and wrong changes, there's no way to see if you're ever making any moral progress. Because say we all agree slavery's wrong, right? So there's got to be a standard that says slavery's wrong, right? If the idea that slavery was wrong changed, you couldn't see whether you're getting better or worse compared to the standard. The standard can't change if you're going to say that, oh, our society's getting better or our society's getting worse. The only way you can use terms like better or worse is if you have a reference that doesn't change, a standard.
How do you objectively measure the morals that are objective? How do you know that you're not measuring a biological moral and you know that it's objective?
Right, that's the support for the second premise, that objective moral duties and values exist. And what I would do here is simply appeal to your moral experience. Don't you think, as you reflect on it, that certain things are genuinely evil, for example? Don't you think that it's wrong to torture a little child for fun as opposed to loving that little child? Don't you think that that is a more plausible account of your moral experience than just saying, well, this is just a biological spin-off of social and biological evolution? So it's kind of like belief in the external world of objects. This is a properly basic belief grounded in your experience. And unless you're given some sort of a defeater for it, you've got no reason to deny what experience teaches you. In the one case that there is a world of physical objects, in the other that there's an objective moral realm. So again, I'll leave it up to you. Which do you think is more plausible? Do you think that there are objective values and duties? If you do, then I think you should believe that God exists.